is Declan Rowley. I'm the principal of St Mel's College, and as we're about to embark on a 6.5 million refurbishment of this magnificent 1865 building, I thought it'd be a very good time in order to do a video of the building as it exists now before we start into the refurbishment, because we know that many past pupils who have come through here would like to see what the building looks like now before we go into a refurbishment. And we'll then do a video that will match it after the refurbishment, and it'll give us a good idea of the past and the future for St Mel's College. So we'll walk through the building, and as I go I'll give a narration in relation to the uses of some of the rooms and some of the areas associated with the building. So as we walk up the avenue, the famous avenue here, the first thing I suppose we would have met over the years was the statue of Bishop Kilduff. And Bishop Kilduff was the bishop who basically built the school building here, because St Mel's College was a day school up at the Market Square for about 6 or 7 years, but by 1865 Bishop Kilduff had completed the building of the school as we see it. It hasn't changed much from this side, and he completed that in 1865, and you know, he died in 1867, 2 years later, in the building of typhoid as well. So it was a masterpiece to create and has lasted the test of time over 156 years since. So we'll walk through the building now and you'll get a good view of what the building is all about. So obviously when we come to the front of St Mel's, this would be the famous blue doors and the front entrance. It wouldn't be an entrance that all students in recent years would have used, but in the past students would have used this as an entrance. And we also see up over the door here was the area, a veranda of type where the Leinster winning teams would always be paraded after winning the Leinster and in the college's football. And even up to recent years, in the last 2 or 3 years when we won underage Leinster titles, the team would be paraded out there on the balcony and the boys would stay here at the bottom, and it would be, I suppose, carrying on the tradition of the past. So we'll walk through the main doors here and we'll go into the main hall. So this is the entrance hall. As you can see from the entrance hall now, it's not in great condition because it hasn't been used for about 20 years. So part of the refurbishment will be the refurbishment of this great hall as well and bring it back to its former glory. And as we walk in through here, we go into what was the bottom corridor. And along this corridor here, we had a number of rooms that people would be familiar with over time. The first one was the trophy room. Again, we'll just take a quick look into the trophy room, but it's basically is no longer used as a trophy room. And again, it'll be a room that will be refurbished in the U project. Now, as we go in here, this was what's called the priest ref. It was one time a staff room as well. And it's a huge room. It's more or less in the same state as it would have been used at that time, but obviously refurbishment will take place in here as well. We would have the priest ref would have been here, and all the priests would have eaten here for lunch and breakfast and so on. And in more recent times then it was used as a staff room, but there's quite a bit of refurbishment on windows and roofs, the ceilings, etc. has to take place, but it has fantastic potential to be a great room in our new refurbishment as well. Then next door, and we'll go into this room next, but you can see there there's double doors down there at the bottom, and that at one time was the library back in the 70s and 80s, but before that it was actually the students' refectory where the students would eat, the boarders would eat during maybe the 40s, 50s, 60s, that period of the school history. So we'll just take a walk down the corridor to that area. So this was the library, and back in the 1980s it was the school library, and before that, as I said, it was the refectory for the boys. So the boarders would eat here, whereas the priests would eat next door as well. So again, it's a huge room. It's presently being used as a classroom. You can see with the desks here, but again, it probably will be used as some type of a classroom in the new refurbishment as well. But again, it has great potential, great light. There's great size windows in it, and it certainly will be very much part of the future of St Mel's as well. So again, this is the bottom corridor as well. This would have been used for classrooms throughout the history of the school, and even right up to the present day, we have classrooms along this corridor here. But this will be the new autism unit. So there will be two special classes here in this area, plus there'll be support rooms as well. So this whole corridor will form part of the autism unit, and we would have 12 children. We have 6 at the moment, but we will have 12, and they will form the base of the 2 special classes. This, at the very bottom of the corridor, the 2 rooms at one time were part of the same room, and that was the study hall, the old study hall, back many years ago, but they're now 2 classrooms. So this is obviously the hall, and this is the stairs up into the first level as well. This is the back entrance or side entrance into the chapel. And again, at one stage during the boarding times, these were the phones would have been in order for boarders to actually ring home. At that time, boarders could have been in here for a full term but without getting home. So therefore, as a result, that was a vital communication to the home area. Again, this corridor here brings us into the chapel. So this is the college chapel. Again, the boarders would have to be down here for Mass every morning, maybe 7:30. Even looking through the history of St. Mel's that Dennis Lennon put together, it would have been even earlier than that in earlier times. But certainly this was where the boarders would have their morning prayer and also their evening prayer as well before going to bed after study. Again, this area was used extensively by St. Mel's Cathedral when the cathedral was damaged with the fire, and over a 5-year period the local people would have used this quite a bit, and it was a great time for the local people to come in and see what is available in St. Mel's. And we'd very much hope that we can retain this and refurbish it and keep it in a very good condition, because it is part of our Catholic school ethos as well. This was what was called the Green Corridor, and it brought us down into the area where the boarders would have their breakfast and their lunch and their dinner, and it brings us right down into this area here. There's also a stairwell here which brings you up into the boarding section, the rooms, and then there's the toilets on the right-hand side, and all of this will be revamped in the new refurbishment as well. So this is now the present school canteen for the students. As we can see there's warm food available. In former times, this was the boarders' ref. This is where the boarders would come in on a daily basis for their breakfast, for lunch, for their dinner, and they would spend a bit of time here. And I suppose rations were quite scarce at times, so it is probably the strongest survived in here at times. But it's now a very modernised canteen area for our students. So we're entering the kitchen area here. This is the areas where food would have been prepared at the time for the boarders and for the priests. So we'll just take a walk through these corridors. Again, there'll be quite a bit of renovation done in this area as well. So as we come out from the area where the priest's ref was and the old library, we can move up the stairs, and again we're going back up into classrooms, but there's only a few classrooms up here. It was generally bedrooms or offices, or there was a staff room up there here at one stage as well. So we'll just take a trip up through this area here. So then this is one of the classrooms here. I remember in my time, Sean Donnelly was the teacher in this classroom, and many other teachers have come and went in this classroom over the years. Originally, it may have been a dormitory for some of the students as well. This is the first room here on this first floor corridor. As we can see there, this has kept in fairly good shape over all the years, even though we haven't been using this building in the last 20 years. This little room here, I suppose some people who were back in the 80s or 70s would remember it was a small room and then in the 90s and 2000s it turned into the first computer room that was in the school. Dennis Lennon would have started computers IT in the school, and this would have been the first one. Originally it was the bookstore, so students who were getting what was known at the time as free books, students who were on medical cards, there was always a bookshop here where we could come up and get the books for the students, and the students could visit themselves, and then it turned into the computer room from there on. So it will form very much part of the new building as well. It'll be a new classroom, or it'll extend out into the next room in order to be a bigger classroom as well. Again, as we walk down to this corridor here, so it was very much admin, priests' bedrooms and so on. There's another room here. It would have been one of the priests' bedrooms. I would remember at the time it was certainly not used as a classroom in my time. So this room, I suppose in the 80s and 90s was used as a small little oratory, and we can walk in. It's more or less in the same condition as it was, a little, I suppose, a sacred space, quiet space, and we'd like to maybe retain it as something like that. Obviously refurbish it, but retain it as a quiet spiritual space for the students. So this was a priest's bedroom. The intention would be, because it's stone walls on either side, that we'd use it as a boardroom. So for board of management meetings, interviews for the future, we need a space like that that's quiet, that's away from the student body, and it would be available during the day if we have interviews or if we have just meetings of any particular type where you need maybe a table and chairs for maybe 6 or 8 people. So that's probably the future of that room. We'll walk into this corridor, because this corridor generally led into another dormitory space here. So this was a dormitory here. It was called Middle Dorm, and it has been broken up into 2 classrooms back in the 80s, 90s era. Hasn't been used obviously in the last 20 years, but again, it brings you into decent sized classroom, corridor created, and then a second classroom as well. We'll just walk around this way. So this was changed in the 90s, and this dormitory then, the back door of it brought you back into the area of corridor that would involve the bedrooms for the boarders. So there's more bedrooms down into that section as well. This section would have been built after the 1865 section. It's a different section than the original building, and it would have been added to the building over years, some years after the 1865 time. Again, it'll turn back into a space that will be used very much for classroom space in the future. And underneath that, there are spaces as well that we'll look at later on. So again, this comes back out of that old dormitory space. That was a large dormitory into areas where there were individual rooms that, particularly if brothers were in the school as boarders, they would share a room, and sometimes seniors would share a room as well, so they wouldn't be in the open dormitory. So these rooms here, again, this space here is, we don't know exactly what we're going to do. It's not part of phase 1, but certainly down the line it may be used for something in relating to the school, or something else, maybe outside school influence as well. So as we walk down these stairs, this brings us back down to an area where many of the former students would remember, particularly boarders, the tuck shop area and the shower area. Many of our boarders in particular would remember this area has been the showers. So I don't think you got a shower every day at that time, maybe once a week, maybe on a Saturday. And then in later years, the football teams would tug in here in the evenings and have a shower or wash themselves down before going home after training as well. As you can see there, it's basically full of, it's just a storage space at the moment. But again, it'll be all cleaned out, and we'd hope that we'll turn this into a science lab in the new building, so it'll be completely refurbished, and turn into a science lab because it has access out onto the ground level at the toilet areas here at the back. And I know this is an area that's very clustered at the moment with building equipment and so on, but for people or for students who in the past, they would remember well this little area here. This is the tuck shop. The senior boarders would run the tuck shop, and every evening it would open for the students to get sweets and bars, etc. So it was a vital area to the whole social fabric of the school at that time. So as we come in from the front door area here, generally visitors would end up travelling up through this corridor here. So students generally didn't climb these stairs except on very special occasions. So as we walked up here, there's an open foyer area here. And then as we walk up the stairs, we go up to the first floor. Now generally, again, visitors, and at that stage, there'd be very few parents would arrive in as compared to nowadays where you'd have parent-teacher meetings and parents would come very often to the school. But at that stage, in those years, not many parents came to the school, but there may be inspectors might arrive or parents of boarders for some reason or other, and they would probably be brought into this area here. I suppose you could nearly call it it's a bit like the parlour. I know that a lot of us as students, when I was a student 40 years ago, we would have sat our oral Irish here around the table with the inspector. And generally, I suppose all the bookcases are very old and antique bookcases, and we'd hope to preserve this room in its former state, refurbish it and bring it back to its former glory. And again, as you can see the window here, that's the window that was the entry point out onto the veranda that the Leinster winning teams would travel out through. So it's a magnificent room. We'd hope to bring it back to its former status. Again, this would have been a bedroom belonging to one of the priests at the time. Maybe the president of the school may have this as a bedroom at the time. In later years, there was an ensuite added on to it, so it's a fine big room. Again, it lacked very much as part of our administration area, maybe guidance office, principal's office, deputy principal's office, something like that in the new refurbishment. This would have been the president's office, and certainly if you arrived here, you had to have good reason to be here. So the president would have worked out of this office. The president or principal of the school at the time would have worked out of this office, and next door then would be the secretarial office. So again, in my time, Rose Donohoe and later then Rosemary Halligan would have been the secretaries who would have spent the last 50 or 60 years here as the secretaries to the principal or president at the time. And as we come towards the bottom of this corridor here, I suppose this room here on the right hand side is one that students didn't see too much of. It is called the billiard room. It was probably the area where the priests and the teachers back all those years ago had a chance just to get a little bit of leisure, a little bit of break away from the students. So while it's not in a very good state right now, again, it's a room that we'd like to bring back to its former glory in the refurbishment. It won't be part of the school, but it'll be part of maybe the history of the school, and we'd like to certainly bring it back to that state if we can at all. So beside the billiard room then, this changed use throughout the years, I suppose. In latter years it was one of the priest's bedrooms, where the priest had a living room maybe and a bedroom. But in earlier years, I remember in my time back in the 80s, it was a staff room. So that's where the staff would come in and have their morning break and maybe their lunch break, etc. So now we're going to go up to the second level, the third story, and as day pupils, we would never have been in this area of the school at all. This was basically confined to areas where the boarders would sleep, and in some cases the priests would sleep as well. So it was sort of an area that the day people didn't see. But so as we walk up the stairs, we'll go through some of the rooms. Again, the room that we're just going to go walk into now is the room that's sitting over first of all, the library or the old boys' ref, and then again there's a dormitory or a classroom on the first level, and now we're on the second level or the third story, and we're walking into a huge room, which again was used as a classroom in latter years, but earlier it would have been a dormitory for the lads. Now, we're definitely hitting into certainly a famous area of the school, which is the Spike Corridor and on to Spike Dormitory. And this was basically where priests would have had their rooms, boarders would have had their rooms, and then there's a full dormitory, which was the first years, about bed area for about 40 first years. And as we walk through it, you'll see it. It's basically partitioned out into sections with the bell tower in the middle of it. But the idea of this is that we can take the partitions out and we can create classrooms here, large classrooms, which will vary in use from maybe music room, DCG room, computer rooms, normal classrooms. So in the next 2 years, this is what the refurbishment project and the design team are trying to do now, is to trying to create the best use of this facility for us. So this is Spike Corridor, go down into Spike. Spike is at the very end, as we called it at the time. There's a number of small rooms, and they were all bedrooms at the time. As you can see there, it's pretty eerie, small rooms, but it would have been alive and very much alive back, let's say, over 20, 25 years ago, from that right through from 1865, where the noise of feet in this corridor would have ran the whole year long. Bar maybe summer months when the students weren't here. So it was a hive of activity. I'm sure many of our past pupils would remember fondly, maybe to an extent, but certainly when you were a first year coming in here for the first few weeks, it was pretty daunting to leave home and end up, I suppose, in a building like this with strangers. But over time, many great friendships were formed here, and some of those friendships existed over a lifetime. Again, what we're intending to do is that we will take out these stud partitions here, basically use this side of the building as a corridor and use this as room space, so that we'll have pretty decent sized rooms, a bit equivalent to the ground floor, where there'll be a corridor running along that edge, and then all of this would turn into classrooms. But we just have a little bit of not necessarily a problem, but a change here, because this is the bell tower. As we see from outside the school, the bell tower sits over this part of the building, so therefore it's solid concrete. So we'll have to divert our corridor probably down along here, back out, through and back in again, in order to take account of the bell tower. Now, as I said, at the bottom of this corridor was the famous Spike Dormitory. The whole story of Spike, I think our former teacher, Tiernan Dolan, would have given the first years a huge fright every year in relation to the story of Spike. I'm not going to recount it now, but certainly it became part of the folklore and myth of the school. So this is where the first years came as boarders for the first year that they were in the school, and the senior prefect was generally the person who actually stayed in this dormitory with the first years. So the dormitory originally was basically like a hospital ward, I suppose, in the past, where there'd be 40 beds and the wash and basins are in the middle. And then at a later stage, when the convent up the road ceased having boarders, then some of the partitions were taken down here, and John Geraghty, John was our caretaker over 44 years here, and John would remember taking some of the partitions into the windows and setting them up here, so that it gave a little bit more privacy to the boys when they were boarders. So So this is, I suppose, this is an example of, I suppose, health and safety at that time as compared to now. This was the escape ladder if something happened at this level. So this ladder obviously was set up in such a way that it could be thrown out the window and lads could get out the window and get away if something happened here at night. And thank God there was no accidents, but it certainly shows you the times and the changes that we have today. In the original building, and as we travel through here we're going to make a connection up with what was called the U-Wing. Now the U-Wing was built around the 1960s, or opened around the 1960s, and it was basically for the boarders, and the rooms are individual rooms, single or rooms that were for 2 people, and there's 4 tiers there altogether. The bottom tier is the canteen that we were in earlier. That replaced the boarders' ref downstairs at the library area, and then the next 3 tiers were all set out for boarders for accommodation. It's still an existing building. It definitely won't form part of the new refurbishment, but again further down the line maybe it could be brought back as an accommodation wing in order for maybe a sports centre relating here to the school because of our new athletic track, because of our very good sports facility. So it may possibly be brought back in down the line, but it certainly would take a lot of money to take it back into where it was. But it's the newer part of this building. This was the beginning of the new building. As we walk through here now, we're into this what's called the new wing. We can see out there, we can see the old courtyard that was there and some of the older buildings. Maybe some of those will be knocked down and maybe something more modern will happen in that courtyard area in the new refurbishment. So this is the famous study hall building. I suppose this is where all our students would have studied, particularly in the boarding time when we would have maybe 140, 150 boarders, and they would study here every night for 3 hours, and then back, so I suppose pre-80s, they would have been here for weekends as well, so would have spent a lot of time in this building studying the different subjects. So it'd be definitely 3 hours a day, if not more, during weekends as well. Again, people would remember we did quite a bit of refurbishment of this and repainted it and fixed dry rot areas and downpipes outside. So the building is actually very secure, very warm, and quite modern, and yet it has most of the design it had in the times when the boarders would have been here. So there would have been desks of boarders all here studying at night time, and the teacher or the priest that would have been here supervising, there would have been a sort of a higher up desk here at the back, keeping an eye on things. So it was quite a task to keep an eye on 120 boarders at the one time for maybe 3 hours. So to get a break maybe for a half an hour in the middle, but this was a study hall, and it is a very important building in today in the school, and will be going forward as well. Just behind me here, I suppose we couldn't pass by it, even though we're looking at the buildings here, but we couldn't pass by it without reflecting back on what was then senior field for many years, where the senior footballers trained and junior footballers trained on a daily basis to win all of those 29 Leinster titles and others at junior level. So that's where a lot of our former footballers would have trained to win those Leinster championships. Now you can see it's a modern AstroTurf, and we have more modern pitches developed out the back, but it certainly is very much part of the history of the school. As we come out as a study hall, you know, our boys will be going into the study hall in the evenings, the lads on senior pitch will be training until dark out there. So it's important to maybe to put that in on the video as well.